I'm also even more excited to be sitting aside this amazing author. We are now friends for life, just in case anybody wanted to know. She's absolutely awesome, and she has blessed us and fortunately graced her with our presence here in Little Rock, Arkansas. I want to share a little bit about her with you all today. I want you all to sit back, relax, get comfortable, because you're about to get a little bit of insight into our conversation and really a discussion with Toya Wolfe, the author. Toya Wolfe grew up in the Robert Taylor homes in Chicago South Side. She earned a Master's of Fine Arts and Creative Writing at Columbia College in Chicago. Her writing has appeared in African Voices, Chicago Journal, Chicago Reader, Hair Trigger 27, and Warpland. She is the recipient of the Zora Neale Hurston Betsy Heard Fiction Award. Go ahead, girl. The Union League Civic and Arts Foundation's Short Story Competition, and the Betty Shiflett John Schultz Short Story Award. So she is an award-winning author already as her debut novel hits. She currently resides in Chicago. Ladies and gentlemen, I present Toya Wolfe. And Toya's gonna read an excerpt from her book, and then we're gonna get into the discussion.
Good afternoon. I'm gonna read the prologue, so there's nothing that you need to know. I'd known Precious forever, Stacia a year, and Toya for just a minute. We were so different, but everybody loved them some double dutch. Sometimes we made a tight-knit crew. Other days, we couldn't get along for nothing. Our friendship started with, "What's your name?" The answer carried with it looks that I can still see clearly. Stacia's begged me not to talk to her, and Toya's asked, "Is she talking to me?" We got past those facial expressions and gave our names. Names that sound like heartbeats: Fifi, Precious, Stacia, Toya. It's kind of a miracle that we formed those bonds because our mothers couldn't stand each other. To this day, I wonder how me and Precious were cool for so long. And Stacia, everybody had something negative to say about the Buchanan family. I knew there'd be backlash for bringing Toya around, but I couldn't know at 12 how bad things would get. That summer, one by one, they dropped out of sight as if we were playing a game of all in together. When you play all, you get 2 people to turn the rope and then a ton of kids. It could be 8 of us. We'd all jump in. The people turning sing all, and repeat the word until there's no more room in the rope. Precious and I began that song before we could even walk. Stacia jumped in when we started 6th grade, and Toya appeared months later in the middle of June. The song went on, and we jumped, screaming the lyrics, attempting to overpower the sounds of construction vehicles as they dismantled our Southside neighborhood in the Robert Taylor homes. All in together, any kind of weather, I see teachers looking out the window, ding, dong, the fire bell, January, February, March, April, May, June, July. When we played the game, people left the rope one at a time, reliably, when they heard their birthday month, but in real life, their departures were sudden. Toya got pulled out of the rope, and not long after her disappearance, Stacia vanished too. Precious stuck around until pretty late in the summer, like her birthday was in August, and then she slid out and rode away in her family's Camry. They left me standing there with the rope. After all these years, I can still hear their voices screaming, "First, second, and zero no higher," and arguing over who said zero no higher first. The memories won't go away. They're proof that once upon a time, I lived in a brick skyscraper on State Street, in a place where stairwells filled with echoes of stampeding gym shoes and harmonizing winos. Those memories won't let me believe that I dreamt up Precious, Stacia, and Toya, but all in together is over. Thank you.
So I have to give a disclaimer that I'm not a formal person.
That's all right.
So this is going to be like a real conversation between Toya and I, because that's who I am. And as I listen to the book and I listen to you talk about the girls in the book, it really connects with me, being a girl from New Orleans, and it takes me back to being a 12-year-old. And so I feel like in honoring the book and in honoring the girls. And the story, it's important to be authentic and to be who you are, right? Yeah. And so it's just going to be a conversation between me and you, like we're sitting at the house in some nice fancy chairs that I don't quite have in my house. But
yeah, no, these chairs are nice.
Very nice. So first, can you kind of paint the picture, the setting of where the girls are in the setting and the backdrop of the book for us?
Yeah, so this book takes place in a housing project and sort of the block surrounding it, but it's one of 28 16-story high-rise buildings that make up the Robert Taylor homes. I'll stop for a minute so you can take that in. 16-story buildings, 28 of them, running down one street for 2 miles.
And if you think, like, there's not even anything like that in Little Rock. Like, there's not 28 high 16-story buildings, like even anywhere in our city. So it definitely takes a minute to process something like that if you have never grown up in a culture like that.
Yeah, so what happened, their spaces are sort of in the very interior of the building. So sometimes you watch movies or shows like The Wire and like you see a bunch of people, like everything happens like outside on the block. But for these girls, they're like inside, sort of in a more protected space, but it's still outdoors and it's still in this very public housing project. So
one of the things I love the way you start the book with the girls playing and the stories. And so initially, you know, I'm like, yeah, because if you've ever been a black girl, especially in the South, you know about double dutch. I just played double dutch this summer, and it was aight.
We got it from you guys. it came from Mississippi. Yeah. Like people moved up from Mississippi to Chicago and brought all these games with them. So thank you.
Yeah, I actually did my thesis on children's games and the connection to children's games in the South and stories, and we won't get into that. But the amazing thing about it is how we all play the same games, but the stories and the way we tell them is a little bit different. And it feels like that with the girls, that even though they're all playing the same game, the rules for each of them are a little bit different. And the way that and even in the beginning, as new girls are introduced into the game, how the game adjusts depending on who's playing. They even talk about, you know, if somebody's coming in and maybe she's not as good of a player, you make adjustments for them. Yeah. And so Fifi, to me, Fifi's the main character. She symbolizes that. She's constantly making adjustments. Does anybody identify with that? Do you identify with that? She's constantly, as a 12-year-old, she's constantly making adjustments to make room and space for other girls and other people. Talk to us a little bit about her character and why did you paint Fifi like that, as the one who's always opening the door, who's making adjustments, who's always pushing, who's trying to bring people together?
Yeah, she definitely is sort of she has a community-based heart, and she wants everyone to sort of like feel at home and fit in, and she understands that she has some friends who are a bit more high maintenance. She knows how they're gonna react when she brings in a new person, and so it's an incredible skill set for a 12-year-old to have, but I gave this narrator like so much, I wanted her to care about the world and to care about people in general. And that would allow her to sort of move around and give you like a wider picture of who these girls are and how this neighborhood functions. I feel like if any of the other girls narrated the book, it would really just be about them and what they want. It would have been a very tunnel visioned, but you've got a narrator who really does sort of read body language and who assesses problems quickly and has conflict resolution skills, you know. And later she becomes a pastor, and you know she's definitely going to use all these skills. But you see her at 12 looking at this group of friends and saying, if we're going to function harmoniously, I'm going to need to do these things, and I'm going to need to like address this quickly and make this person understand that they're valued. And so again, like for a 12-year-old, you wish you were parenting this 12-year-old.
And it was interesting is I always feel a sense of, I guess, unsettled, because in the book I have to keep reminding myself of where it's taking place and what the girls' lives are like. and that they're living. I mean, in the book, I think there's one chapter that's even titled "War." It's a war zone, that they're actually experiencing so many things around them, and the way, like, I have to keep reminding myself that the book is Fifi. These girls are 12 years old, but I'm an adult reading it, and it's pulling me back and forth between my 12-year-old self and being an adult. And I'm wondering, like, how difficult it must be for a 12-year-old to navigate the terms and conditions that have been placed on their lives. That, who wants to experience that? And so for me, I'm always, as I'm reading, I'm always a bit unsettled, because I'm like, wow, I can't imagine, because some of the things I can definitely relate to in the book, but how challenging it must be. And so explain to me, what was that process like, going back and forth and kind of getting into the mindset and taking yourself back to having to get into the mindset of a 12-year-old girl, but still making it appeal to adults and having that connection?
Yeah, so this is not my story specifically, but I do remember growing up in the Robert Taylor homes and having like girlfriends and playing rope outside, even though like all these things could happen at any moment. And I think what I wanted to sort of share with people through this fictional tale is that there are people living in war zones and they're still functioning. They still have joy, they still have communities, parents are still raising families. And even like if you're a kid living in this kind of neighborhood, you know what to do to stay safe, and you know when things don't look quite right and how to hunker down. Like, so it's not a thing that you even think about. Like, you've just adapted to being in these conditions, and they live their lives until they need to stop, until there's a disruption.
Yeah, and if you haven't had a chance, and of course I won't spoil it, but I mean, it really reminds you of what some of our children see and experience, I mean, in our communities, but even in third world countries. Like, the girls could be playing rope and, they hear gunfire, and immediately they know exactly what to do. Like, they know, and then they just go on like nothing, nothing ever happened. And so you're definitely right about that. I want to talk about the parents of the girls. Yeah. So the main characters are 4 girls, 12-year-olds. And the adults around them are predominantly women, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. Yeah. But the fact that, there's always a sense of culture and community, always within the African-American community, a sense of having a village around you, women, people uplifting you, supporting you no matter who you are, where you come from. But it's really interesting to me in this book that the 4 girls, none of their moms are friends. Like, none of them, like, the girls are the best, are their best friends, but none of their moms, they don't talk to, they don't, like, really, none of the adults. Honestly, as I was thinking, I was like, none of the adults in the book, like, they all are confined to this one space, and none of the adults are really friends. They don't really talk, but specifically none of their moms. And I'm like, wow, like, because I'm a friendly person. I talk to almost anybody. So why is it that none of the adults, is that intentional, that not only the moms, but like none of the adults in the book really kind of have that?
Well, think about it. These girls would actually, the girls shouldn't actually be friends. Like, they're all so very different. For those of you who are like just hearing about this book for the first time, these 4 girls, 2 of the girls, their parents know each other, but the reason those moms aren't friends is because the main character's mom, she used to date, like, her childhood high school boyfriend is Precious's dad. Yeah. So they've been friends since they were like born.
Precious could have been like Fifi's
like a sibling,
sister, yeah.
Right? But their parents know that they come from good families, so they let them play together. But they're not friends, yes. Right? And then you have one of the parents, she's actually like a gangster queen pin and like runs the gang in the neighborhood. So no one's gonna be friends with her because she's essentially a criminal, And then the 4th parent is a drug addict. Yeah. And so in my mind, logically, these girls, their parents would not hang out together because of all of these very specific reasons. Yeah. But they love their kids, and so I think they all sort of bless these relationships, but they're not going to be fake and try to hang out, because that's not, they're not the kind of people they're going to spend time with. And I wanted to put that, I feel like that's realistic, because the other thing we see in African American literature is sometimes we're like holding hands and skipping down the street, and that's not always the, that's not how community
works. We ain't cool like that. No.
Right. Community is not always so perfect and tied up in a nice little bow. Think about your neighbors. There's some of your neighbors you're like, we are never going to hang out. I am never bringing you cookies. But I would. But thank you for mowing your lawn. I respect that, right? So you can respect people, but not have a friendship with them.
That's true. You're right. And sometimes, like, we don't. It's interesting because what we allow our kids to do, but what we don't do, which also our kids learn from. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, we're like, oh yeah, you can be friends with anybody, but then you're not friends with their. But they're like, well, Mama, you're not friends with Miss Sheila. And so the other part that I think is interesting, if you don't know the history, and I think oftentimes people will read books like The Last Summer on State Street, and they will just assume that, oh, they must have done something to be put in that situation. Because one of the things you said is that Precious's family and Fifi's family both come from, pretty good backgrounds. Yeah. And the whole history behind the projects and how they became the projects, and that, people look at them, especially in the 90s, and you look at Cabrini Green and just all these, and oh my God, I would never want to live there, and I can't believe, and what must those people have done? Yeah. And people don't really understand the deep-rooted history of discrimination that has happened in our country, that has allowed so many people of color to be disenfranchised, that have allowed people of color, that there has been not a support, and so this ongoing system that we see. And so it's interesting to me, even as I read, I do want to make sure that people know, and even as they read it, that the stories are very complex. And I love the fact that no character should be just one-dimensional. But even as you look at all the different characters and the adults. And you told me something, so I want you to share with the audience, because I'm very curious. I'm like, okay, I want to know more about the parents. I want to know what's going to happen, but how they got in those situations. And oftentimes we see people and we just see them from one point of view, but there's more. There's another side to the story, right?
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about how a lot of African Americans come from the South. They moved up to the North, and in Chicago specifically. The politicians and even like the white residents in Chicago, they were really just adamant about not integrating their neighborhoods. And so the Robert Taylor Homes was built on an existing slum in Chicago. So it's like people came up to Chicago and there were jobs they could not get and neighborhoods they could not live in. And so it's like this housing project was sort of pitched as like, here's this promising, lovely new construction, that I actually found out they built 28 buildings in a year. I want you to think about how well constructed and what wonderful materials were used to throw these buildings up in 1 year. And so no one wants to live in housing like that. Yeah. So those folks are right. When you look at those buildings and think like, I would never want to live there, those people would never want to live there either. Right. But it's just like you didn't have a ton of options. Yeah. Like leaving Jim Crow South and like all the terrorism and like hearing that there's a promise of like a space where like this does not happen and you can have a better life, only to come up to Chicago and get like this bit of space in this part of town where they had built a highway to separate Black people from white people. So it's like that's the foundation of the Robert Taylor Homes and a lot of housing projects.
Yep. And that idea of course, that great migration, but redlining and where African Americans could live, and just I just wanted you to point that out, because again, I think sometimes people read or people look at certain storylines and forget that all across the United States, it was systematically planned that African Americans were divided in different neighborhoods. It wasn't because they wanted to; it's because they did not have another choice, because that is what the rule of the law of the day said. Okay, so I want to get a little bit more into some of the other characters. Particularly, I want to talk about Fifi's brother, Michi. Yeah. So I really want to, Okay, so Fifi has an older brother, Michi, who lives in the house with them. And I don't know how much I can get. I don't want to give away everything. But, all around them, gangs and violence. And so it's almost as if once you hit a certain age, really, I would say even from a little boy, but it's almost like a light goes on and you could immediately be pulled into the culture of gangs. And so Fifi's mom wants to do an amazing job, which she's done a great job as a mom of protecting her son. And so you always see him inside. He's never interacting. He's never with anybody else. There's not a father figure around. Yeah. And so when we see Michi, we're like, oh, okay, like he's kind of shielded. But then it feels like all of a sudden there's this shift in the character of who he becomes. And so there's a question of, has he always, can we talk about what happened to Michi or something? Because I'm like, how much do we give away?
Yeah.
And so there's a great part in the book that I want to talk about. And so this part is, there's something that's happened in the projects, and so there are these no-knock warrants. No-knock warrants, so the cops can come in at any time, kick your door and do whatever they need to do. And so Fifi and her mom and Michi, they're in the house, and it's the middle of the night. It says, but Mama is used to opening the door during these sweeps. Did they want what they wanted and let them in? And it had not occurred to her that her son was now 16 and that the police might accuse him of being a gangbanger. She saw her sweet, curious boy and didn't view him through their lenses. Michi wasn't a gangbanger, but even I knew he might be mistaken by one for the police. So there's this whole sense of wanting to protect your son, wanting to protect your family, but not having really any, not having a voice to do that. So you see Michi painted as this sweet son for almost like, a pretty good amount of the book. Yeah. And then Michi becomes a gangbanger. And it completely shocks me because Fifi and her mom are the good ones in the book. What do you mean he stays inside? How does he become a gangbanger? And then he gets thrown into jail. Completely.
Well, he's thrown into jail, and then he becomes a gangbanger.
Yes, he did. Yeah, he's thrown into jail, and it's almost like, well, it's going to happen anyway. It's almost like I can't escape it. It's like even when I want to do good, evil is always there. But it's like, was it always there? Was it was it prison? Was it that?
You have to remember that Fifi's narrating the story, and there's only so much she knows. So before Michi interacts with the police, or before he actually joins a gang, there's all this season of coercion happening behind.
I know that. I want to know. Like, I need to know.
But this narrator wouldn't know at that time. And it's interesting. Like, I think it was really intentional that you saw him the way his parents saw him, the way his sister saw him, because that's who he was. And then you get this vision of how the police see him, which is he's a criminal, he's gonna commit crimes, like maybe we shouldn't take him to jail, but eventually he's gonna end up like everybody else in this neighborhood too. So I think it's a story I definitely wanted to tell. Like, this is a book about girlhood, but we have brothers and we have uncles and we have dads, and but I wanted to put them sort of in the background and only give you the kind of information that our narrator would know.
She would have known, right? But I love the way that it shows. There, even as I read all of the girls and their parents, again, I say it again, right? That there's not a good or bad, right? That we all have a little bit of everything in us. That's, in my opinion, neither good or bad. It's just who we are as people. And I think so often, especially within the African American community, if you look a certain way, if you live a certain neighborhood, if you do certain things, then you're automatically bad, and that's it, right? And so when even as they come into the houses, right, they're automatically assuming that I'm looking for something in here, and I'm absolutely going to find it because anybody that lives in here is identified this way, right? Why else in this neighborhood would I be given the opportunity to do this, but not in other communities and neighborhoods? And so, yeah, Michi's character, It perplexes me, but it also reminded me of so many young black men that I know, and I see them one way, right? But I feel like the community and the world sees them the other. So
And when you put people in impossible situations and tell them to make a choice, it's probably not going to be this sort of positive, choice, because the options for Michi are continue to get beat up every day by this gang or join the gang.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of life is that?
And so even as I'm reading the book, I'm imagining like what that must be like every day, going back and forth, passing by, getting picked on, getting beat up, I mean, what do you do?
And then his mother and sister don't even know this is happening to him.
No.
And just whether it's pride or protecting them, he doesn't share this with them when he comes home. He's got a whole other sort of world and misery going on. And it's I think in this very specific time in the 90s, this is how sort of gang recruitment happened. If a gang decided you were going to be a part of their gang, they were going to pull you into their gang. And there was nothing that your parents could do. And I feel like this doesn't get talked about either. Like if you're watching the news and you see that a guy has committed a crime, there's such a whole under all the story behind how this person became a kid with a pistol or a kid who commits crimes. Like that entire story is left out. And I really wanted to give this character, I wanted you to meet this character, see him as a child, and see how he becomes who he becomes.
I think one of the reasons in the book I'm constantly kind of, I guess, not settled is because I constantly feel like in a place there should be peace, there's not. There are only little snippets of peace, right? There's like when they're playing jump rope, there's peace. Until something disrupts it. We talk about this whole experience that Fifi has when she goes to church with her friend, Precious, and she experiences a sense of peace. When they talk to some of their teachers, there's this sense of peace, but there's constant disruptions. And so I began to ask myself, what must that be like, again, for a child, for a 12-year-old life, to constantly feel unsettled and to not have a sense of peace in a place, your home. It's that whole American dream, home sweet home, right? Was it Dorothy, click your heels 3 times, there's no place like home. Not here. In my brain, I'm like, this is not what home is supposed to be. And so as I constantly think about them and going through the book, I'm like, wow, I cannot imagine the struggle of the parents of wanting to protect their kids like Michi, but constantly feeling that sense of there's really nothing I can do about it. As a parent, even as no-knock warrants are happening, even as they're being pulled into gang violence, even as girls are being raped, like there's nothing I can do, and what that must feel like as a parent, and there's really nobody you can call to.
And I'm aware that this book, for some parents, it is just it is a worst nightmare. And people read the book and I'm a fiction writer, and of course there's a story I'm telling here, but then there's also sort of, you pull back and you think you would not want your worst enemy to grow up in a neighborhood like this.
No.
But it was super important for me to also get down these moments of joy and these moments of peace and these moments of hope, because they exist. And I feel like that's the part of the narrative that's missing when you watch the news or you read articles about neighborhoods like this. Folks are going on and they are looking beyond their circumstances. So and
I like the fact that, again, it's multi-layered, it's multi-dimensional, and it shows that, like you said, even though Fifi and the girls experience trauma, they still experience friendship, and they go on, and especially Fifi. I mean, she has a very fulfilled life, and I'm definitely not gonna give away the end of the book, but she goes back and she starts to revisit her past and her history and what that must be like. So I want to ask you, what is your favorite part of the book?
I have a lot of favorite parts.
Really?
But I will, probably at the very top is the scene where they go down to the fireworks, because It is, I think about my childhood and so for a second, I want you to think about Chicago and our beautiful architecture and our museums and all the stuff that you go see when you go to Chicago. I grew up with that stuff as like my playground because my mom knew our neighborhood was terrible and we would get on the bus and go downtown and be tourists. And I just kind of I thought about how every year on July 3rd, we had these big fireworks over the lake, and even if you were a white family from the suburbs or you were a middle-class black family from another part of the South Side, everybody, for one evening, we were downtown at the fireworks together. There was no beef. There was no I'm better than you. It was we are here to watch these fireworks and hear this patriotic music, but we are here together, right? And so I characterize this scene where Fifi asks her mom if she can take her friends and can they just all go downtown, and her mom does everybody's hair, and they get their little outfits together, and they get on the bus and they go downtown, and I think about, Chicago doesn't have the July 3rd fireworks anymore because apparently fireworks are very expensive. And so we got a new mayor, and he's like, this has to go. So that got shut down. But
virtual fireworks. No, I'm just playing.
But I love that, so many things in this book, it just kind of cements a part of Chicago history. And so they go downtown, and they're just for one night, they don't come from these families. They don't come from this neighborhood where there's gunfire and stuff. They are really just having a great time as girls, and even in their little girl group, there's no conflict. So that's kind of one of my favorite scenes in the book.
It is, so that whole experience, for me, it's one of my favorite because it's a whole experience. Because anybody that knows me, I like the whole experience. It wasn't even necessarily the fire, but it was everybody getting their hair done and they're getting outfits and talking about they're going to, the whole, because, it was the building up of the excitement. That was actually one of my favorite parts.
It's a very long day.
Yeah. It was definitely one of my favorite parts. So then more about the book and more insight from you. Is there anything in the book that after it was done, you're gosh, I took that out, but I really maybe wish I hadn't took it out, or there's something in, and you're I'm not quite sure. Or do you feel nope, this is it is complete, it's the Bible, it's done.
I worked on this book for so long, and I have an agent who's very editorial. We went at this manuscript for years. This book sort of came together over 13 years.
Wow.
We grew up together. And then I found this agent who's brilliant, and we revised it for 2 years. She literally said to me when we started working together, we're gonna work on this book until it's done, until we both feel it's ready to go to New York. And I didn't realize she was serious. She was really serious. But then it means it went out this very tight, clean manuscript. And I'm not someone who obsesses over all the words that she writes. So I know if taking something out is gonna make it tighter, I'll take it out. I'll keep it, I don't I'm also not one of those writers who throw stuff in the trash. I see the stuff on TV and I'm who are these people? But I'll keep them so that if I wanna use them later, or if I return to the story world. But I am very happy with what's in these pages.
I think so. I will say that for me, and I was talking to someone, I was usually it takes me a while to get through because I put it down, I pick it up. It took me 2 days.
Yeah.
I sat down for 2 days and I was highlighting, I was bending, and I was reading, and it is such a good read. And I think for me, again, because I definitely feel a sense of connection, being a city girl. And what's happening with the girls, and that there are these, these points of but they've still got the fireworks and all the things that they experience as friends. And so it is definitely one of my favorite reads that I've had thus far in a very long time. So I want to ask you this. You just mentioned that you don't throw anything away as a writer. So this book is clearly fiction. So do you consider yourself just a fictional writer, or have you written other things, or do you want to explore other areas?
Oh, for sure. I think fiction is where my talent is. You have to be honest with yourself. I could write a nonfiction book. I just don't think it would be as interesting. But that being said, I did adapt the book into a TV pilot because I see these characters.
Totally.
Yeah, I see them I think people will want to hang out with them for a while.
Yeah.
And I think when you write a feature, it's kind of one and done. Yeah, you can go back and watch a film, but I feel like a TV show allows you to like hang out for weeks with characters, get to know their backstories and things like that.
There's so much with each of these characters. Did you know that immediately, like as you were writing, that you wanted it to be something?
No, but afterwards I was like, who's gonna write this script the way I would? Like, I know these characters, I made them. We've been hanging out forever. You
Like
know?
I really want, like, yes, I want a book with Fifi. I want a book with Michi. I want, like, I'm like, because I really want to know more.
Yeah. Well, I'm most interested in their parents now.
Yeah.
Like, it's funny. Back in the day, like on Saturday mornings, there would be the Muppet Babies, this like cartoon, and
Muppet Babies.
you only saw the parents' legs because it was not about the parents. It was literally about these like these kids running around together. And I joke that it's like this in this book. Like you really kind of only see the parents' legs, but they have like a whole world. Like this neighborhood comes down and it affects the parents too. And so I'm interested in like revisiting this story world and backing up a little bit to like when the buildings were built and how all these families ended up in these buildings together.
Oh, I can't wait for that. So a book on the parents.
Yeah.
And
kind of like a First Summer on State Street. Like what are like the origins of this story world?
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Let us know when it comes out.
I got you.
13 years?
No.
Okay.
No. We're done with that.
So that means, did you finish it during the pandemic?
It was finished. I was revising it during the pandemic. And
Are we still in the pandemic?
I mean, I know what you mean. During the quarantine. Let's say the quarantine.
Quarantine.
When we were all at home,
Quarantine.
locked down. I was revising it, and I was reading a bunch of like screenplay scripts. So I was reading a lot of like I read Moonlight. I just wanted to wrap my brain around like a different kind of storytelling. And novels are really hard for me to get through because the writer in me wants to stop and think about what just happened and the structure of it all. But I can read a script, like there's some distance there. I can just read it straight through. It's like 99 pages, there's a lot of dialogue in it. I'm just like, this is candy. Yeah. So during quarantine, I was reading a lot of film scripts that I read the, what is that? It's called The Beast of the Southern.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Is it Wild?
Yes, Beast of the Southern Wild.
Yes.
I really wanted to.
That's so good.
Like stories where there's like one character that we're following through their journey, like a young person. And so I read a lot of scripts, and then I was revising this because, you know, my agent, it wasn't ready yet. And I was like, well, we're still in here.
Let's get it done. Yeah. So let me ask you this. Do you consider yourself, because I do, my shtick is African American history in Arkansas. So do you consider yourself an author, or do you consider yourself a Black author? Is there a difference? Does that mean something to you in your writing and in your work?
Yeah. So I consider myself a writer because I write, you know, articles and essays and scripts and things like that. And I definitely am a Black writer because I grew up, when I was younger, like when I first started college, I was reading a lot of Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Toni Cade Bambara, all these like Black women writers. And before I even started this book, I was asking myself the question, like, what kind of Black woman writer am I going to be? There was not even a moment where I was like, are you gonna be a Black writer or just a writer? Like, the question was, what kind of Black woman writer are you going to be? And what are you gonna add to the canon?
Wow.
You know?
Yes.
And I didn't obsess about the question, but I just remember having this question, and I realized that no one was writing about little Black girls on the south side of Chicago, like in the city, you know, and what that would be like. And so I think, like right now, I just found out that my audiobook is the #1 African American audiobook on Amazon.
Oh my gosh!
Thank you.
Congratulations!
And I realize people might say like, well, why African American? I'm like, I don't have time for that. That's incredible. That means people are listening to my story and they are talking about it. And so, I know it's a label, but it is what it is. I write about Black people, Black women, our culture, where we come from, what we love, what we do, from my perspective. Like, it's definitely not a singular story, but like from my perspective as a writer and my like lived experience.
So speaking of your lived experience, and the best things, you know, like the best movies and stories and songs and books come from a sense of there's some truth in there, right? So after this was done and this was finished, and you've sat with it for quite a bit of time, what truth have you realized, or what have you discovered about yourself, or after the book? Is there something, do you feel like, wow, like I hadn't realized that, but now that this is done, you feel like it's created something, maybe birthed something within you, maybe challenged something?
I will say, I didn't know how much history I was like sitting on. Like, people ask me all the time, did you research a lot for this book? And I feel awful when I tell them no. Look,
I knew that.
I barely researched anything.
I knew all of that.
I researched to make sure I wasn't telling a lie. But after I researched, I realized, like, yeah. And it's because my grandma died last year at like 92.
Oh, wow.
And our entire relationship, like my entire life, I was really close to her, and she was always telling me stories and always telling me about our history. And so I have all this history inside of me, like specifically Chicago, like African American history, and I just didn't know it was all in there, or even this desire. If you asked me, like, Toya, are you into history? I'd be like, not really, but apparently I am.
Because there's so much Chicago history. There's so much history of the families moving from the South to Chicago. That's really good, that children need to know about our history, our migration out of the South. And so this would be such an amazing book and read for children and schools, so that they know.
So I was at Philander Smith on Friday. Shout out to them. It was an incredible experience. And there was a student there who grew up in Robert Taylor Homes and lived in the very last building that they tore down.
Wow.
And I looked at him and just realized that with just a little bit of information, that the two of us are connected in a way that I'm not connected to most Americans, right? And I think about, like, we were joking, I was like, who are your parents? Like, what are their names? Because I'm like, maybe I went to school with them. And he's like, he's gonna go home and like talk to his parents. But just talking to his parents now, he's gonna go home and ask more questions because I've sort of opened this door. And he has story. He actually wrote, I made them write in a little workshop too, and he actually read about it, a memory that he had of like hanging out in the buildings. And so I just think it's fascinating that there is this whole community holding on to all these stories, and not everyone is like compelled to write down these stories. I feel like you guys don't have a choice anymore. I'm out here now. But there are so many people who have stories to tell, and they become sort of historians because these places don't exist anymore, and only like some of us are out here sitting on this information and actually like have the words and the desire to share it.
Well, let's talk about that so many of us have stories to tell. Because I know I want to be a writer. I feel like I am,
you are,
but I'm not.
No.
It's just not written down. But talk about the process. Like, if somebody's interested, like if he really truly then wants to go back and write, how hard? Like, where do you even get started?
You just start.
Yeah.
I think people like overthink it. Just write a sentence, call it something, save it somewhere. You just started your book.
Yeah.
And it may take you a while to figure out what it wants to be, what shape it wants to take, but I think we spend so much time thinking about, can I do this? Would anybody even read this? Will this be any good? And you don't have time for that. Like, one of the things the students said on Friday was that, like, hey, you didn't even give us a chance to be like worried about what we're doing. And it's intentional. I'm just like, pull out your notepad. I want you to think about that story you wanted to tell. And then we just kind of talk through it. I'm like, all right, go straight to the moment you see. And I just think that we are always questioning whether we have the skills, whether we're the person to tell the story. Maybe you have a sister and you're like, she probably would tell this story better. Like, she was born first. And it's like, none of that matters. Just start writing.
That sounds like a good way to start the story. My sister would probably write it better because she was born first.
Yeah, you guys can have that. No.
So I'm going to give the audience a chance. I'm going to open it up and ask if anybody has any questions. We have a couple of microphones. You're welcome to go to the microphones and ask questions. If not, I am a born talker, and I love Toya, and I love this book, so I will continue to talk to her and ask questions if there are none from the audience.
I have a question. Do I have to get up?
Yes, ma'am.
Bring the microphone. Well, okay. it's about your technique. Do you actually start out with a story outline, and you know what you want to write about, just at a high level, and then drill down into more granular settings?
If there are any teachers out here in the audience, please cover your ears. I am a very messy writer. I am not concerned with where things are going. I do not make outlines. I am more concerned with like what I can see, right? So like, where am I in the world? Who's there? And I just love to make a mess, and I'm gonna clean it up later. That's what revision is, but first draft should just be called the mess, right? Just get the mess out of your head.
I feel like that's my life.
Onto the page. And I do, listen, I have like writer friends who outline extensively, and that process works for them, but that's actually not very fun for me either. Like, I love the discovery part of writing a thing. Like, where is this gonna go? Who are these characters going to be? There's a character in the book who just kind of rose up and was taking over the narrative, and I didn't like it at all. But then I realized, like, oh, she really is sort of a big deal. It's the Stacia character. She's very different from our narrator, and she's not a very likable character to a lot of people, but she's important, and her story was important. And so I just kind of let a thing grow into what it wants to be. And you just have to trust yourself that you'll get to a place where you can kind of look at the mess and start to give it structure and shape. But sometimes we get caught up in these outlines, and then if you write it out, here's the problem with outlines is that you can write an outline and then you can be so, you want to stick to it and you're so rigid. And so I just think a first draft ought to be whatever it wants to be, and like, it's okay if it's a mess and you don't really know what it is. You can go back later and see like, oh, there's some themes here. Like, look at what I did, just sort of in this very, you weren't very conscious of what you were doing, and now you get to kind of make some intentional decisions.
Well, did you start out with this in mind, that you wanted to teach a lesson here, or is there a moral to this story, or?
No. No. And it's so funny, like, people love to ask me about themes, like, what are the themes and what are the takeaways? And I'm like, I am a fiction writer. I am a creative writer. I had a story that I kept seeing, it wanted to come out, and here it is. And there are like conversations happening in this book about race relations, about redlining and policy. Yeah. There's some policy folks back in Chicago who are just like, were we that bad? And I'm like, listen, I'm so glad that this book starts conversations, but I set out to tell the story that I see.
I love that. You're like, no, it's just a story. I like that you said the mess, because I'm in my brain, I just, like you said, like, oh, like, I like that word, or I like that vision. I'm just gonna go with that and see where it takes me. Then when it stops, I'll go on to something else.
And in the summer, when the paperback version of this book comes out, there is like a question guide in the back for people who are teachers, or like you're in a book club. And I gave the publisher those questions because they asked me for them. And I was like, all right, here are some themes that I noticed after I wrote the book. So yes, there are themes, and yes, there are things like that you can talk about. But as a writer, I personally don't set out. Yeah. I have a very loose idea of what's about to happen, and that's the part that I enjoy the most.
So Stacia, you talk about Stacia, I didn't like her.
And a lot of people don't.
She had an attitude. But I will say, in the end, it's funny, like, her character changes, and I mean, life happens.
She's a child.
Yeah.
You meet her as a 12-year-old, and some 12-year-olds are very selfish.
I know, but it took me back to the girls who were like, when I was 12, and who they were my friends, but I didn't, like, y'all, if you have not read the book, like, Fifi be running every day. Like, I mean, anyway, not every day, but they have a little. And they have some encounters, but you're right, they're just kids. But I'm like, man, Stacia, like, she about that life. So let me ask you this. So you talk about the writing process. I'm sorry, were there any more questions?
There's a question.
Oh, there's Pilar.
I have a question.
Okay.
When you were writing the book, was there ever a time like when you doubted yourself or wanted to give up?
Yes. Yes. Maybe year 4, year 7, year 9. Yeah, I was working on this book for a long time, and all of my writer friends were writing things and starting new things, and I was still working on this thing. And I actually didn't question whether I would finish it. My doubt was, do I have the stamina to stick with this thing until it is what it needs to be? So I wasn't gonna give up, but I questioned, like, why is this taking so long? Will I ever get there? Like, I knew it wasn't what it needed to be yet. And then I had people around me like, go get a job and like stop trying to write. And maybe they didn't say it directly, but it was just like, oh, honey, are you still working on that thing? So yes, there are gonna be times when you doubt yourself, but listen to, realize that you're the only person who could write this thing that you're trying to write. And some days are gonna be better than others. Some days you're gonna wake up like, I got this. And some days you're gonna be like, why do I torture myself? Just like stick with it and understand that every day is not gonna feel the same. But doubt is actually kind of a natural part of being a creative, I think.
That was my only question.
Thank you.
That was a good one.
The very first book event I ever had in Chicago, there were about 6 young people who asked really smart questions. Half of them, I used to be their babysitter. And I taught them how to read and write, some of them. So it was just like a full circle moment, like, and now they're asking questions.
I'm so proud
I'm
of
sorry,
them.
there was a hand somewhere.
Yeah. Right here.
Is this about the city as much as it is, excuse me, is this about the city as much as it is about the girls?
I think you get a lot of information about the city, but I'm actually more concerned with people and not Chicago's architecture, not Chicago as a city, because I think we have enough people who like love and worship those things, and I really want us to get back to caring about people the way we care about buildings.
Right. So it's not just about black girls. It's really about the forming of a person. And you started at some point, which was 12 years old there, and this could have taken place in any city.
I think people will definitely, like he is saying, she grew up in New Orleans and like she sees herself. So I'm a black woman. I remember what it was like to be a black girl. I told a story about black girlhood specifically, but people are going to read this story and relate to it as girlhood. There's girlhood stuff in here. Or people who are really connected to their neighborhoods or like their cities help form their identity. And so it's kind of like the theme question we were talking about. I didn't set out, like the more specific you are, the more universal your writing is, which makes no sense to me at all. But I like really wanted to tell a very specific story about girlhood set in a very specific place. But I have just loved all the conversations I've had with people about how they see themselves in these characters. I have a friend, her mom grew up on a farm and she read the book and she's just like, I could really connect to these characters. Wow. It's like, what?
There's not a chicken in the character.
And in March, the Penguin UK is putting the book out in the UK. It's going to Africa. It's going to the Caribbean. I cannot wait to hear from folks from all over the world about whether or not they can see themselves in these girls who are growing up on the south side of Chicago.
That's great. Like you said,
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to reading it.
Thank you.
you said the more specific you are, the more broad the appeal.
Yeah. And you see that a lot with like film and TV. Like people don't want to buy scripts that aren't about a very specific thing. If you've, has anybody watched like Fargo, the TV show? It's about a very specific culture of folks living in Minneapolis who have roots back in Fargo, North Dakota? South Dakota. I'm gonna mess it up now. But it's a very...
Dakotas.
One of the Dakotas. It's very specific to a very specific culture, but it makes you think about what accents your family, what kind of language they use, and like what other towns are they connected to. So yeah, if you're writing a thing, like be as specific as possible, and that makes it like so much more interesting and universal.
First, thank you for coming.
Absolutely,
So
thanks for having me.
Did your characters obey you? Did you have how you wanted them to be
No.
when they appeared, or did they at some point in time say, no, that's not me, I'm somebody else?
Absolutely, and I didn't like it. We don't like these moments as writers, but they know what they want. I think it's because you go in, especially as like a fiction writer, you go in with ideas about what a character needs to be, and while you're writing, you realize like it's bigger than that, or you follow your instincts and you're like, this character needs to have these things going on. So I think it happens. I hear it from other writer friends too. I think it happens with everybody's writing, and you kind of have to have the flexibility to let these characters be who they need to be. She's getting her steps in.
Thank you. With you being from Chicago, have you heard from Michelle Obama or?
Not yet. If anyone knows the Obamas, please tell them to reach out to me or my publicist or my publisher.
Okay.
No, I would love, because I would actually love for the Chicago, like Oprah, the Obamas, like people who have like a Chicago experience to read this book and like to be in conversation with them. Because the fact is, like when people use the term the South Side, I'm like, say more words, because I want to know whose South Side we're talking about. Like, what decade are we in? What neighborhood are we in? What socioeconomic background are we talking about? Because the South Side is like vast. There are people who own beautiful homes on the South Side, and then there are people who are renting in terrible housing projects on the South Side. And I think about Michelle Obama, and I think about Lena Waithe, if you know this name. Like, the three of us all grew up in very different South Sides of Chicago, and we're all three very different Black women. And so I'm hoping in the future I'll get to have that conversation with them.
Wonderful. Congratulations. I can't wait to listen
Thank
to
you.
your book, the audio.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so tell us what's next. Like, what is next? Michelle Obama, if you happen to be watching or listening, put it out there in the atmosphere.
I definitely am working on another book that is set in a similar story world. But there's some TV shows I'd like to write. There's a feature film that I want to write. So there's a lot of writing happening, and winter's coming. And I'm an extrovert. I love to like just ask the folks where I've been in Little Rock since I landed on Thursday night. The answer is everywhere.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
The answer is everywhere. But when winter comes, I sit down and I look out the window at the snow and I go, no, thank you. And I write lots of things. And so I'm excited about this fall and winter. Getting some things written. Also, because I've been working on this book for so long, there are other projects that have just been backed up in my mind.
Yeah.
And I'm so excited to just get them all out on paper. And so I will be around for a long time, guys. Like, sorry, there's a lot of things I want to write and a lot of these conversations I'd love to have with all of you. So, yeah.
And I want to ask you two more questions. One, we talked about, where do you start in the writing process? But if you have it, like if you've already written something, what's the next step? Because I know a lot of times we just don't know where to go next. So we have it written down. What's the next step?
So before you even start reaching out to people about publishing, you probably need to revise that thing 20 more times.
Oh,
So the next step is that you go back and make it the best quality piece of writing that you could possibly make it. When the thought of reading your work makes you nauseous, then it's ready to go out to somebody else.
that's a good point.
Like, you literally have to do your due diligence, like as a writer, to make sure that your work is like tight and it is the best that you can do on your own. And then if you want to go the literary agent route, that's when you start looking for an agent or an editor. But also, the whole time that you're working on your book, you ought to be talking to people about what you're writing and meeting people. This is the whole networking part. Like, we use this word so much, but I don't like the term networking because it feels so cold and calculated. You ought to just be meeting people.
Yep.
And listening to them and talking to them. And so when it's time for you to like look for an agent or to think about, who's gonna actually turn these pages into a book, there ought to be so many people that you have met that you could say like, hey, I'm ready to send this out. Do you like have some people I could meet or some ideas? Like, I just think it all kind of works in concert. You should be writing and you should also be out supporting other people. I sat in so many rooms like this, like from the time I started college, I'd read the paper and it says somebody was in town and I'd read about their book and then I would like go. I'd just pop up and I'd ask them questions and I just, it just became part of my life. And so by the time you have a thing that you're ready to share with like an industry person, it should be like really tight and you should have a whole slew of a community of people to like ask, can I meet your agent, or are there people you think I should be talking to?
Awesome. It's a really good advice. Write it down if you're wondering what the next process is. So this has been such an amazing conversation. If you have not already, please make sure you grab Toya's book, The Last Summer on State Street. You can read it, right? You can get the read version on audio. Yeah. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it at you can get it here today. Yeah. If you don't have a copy of it, make sure you get your copy.
Definitely think about people who ought to be reading this book, and like, no shade to people who don't read bound books. Like, there are people who apologize to me. I listened to the audiobook. I'm like, thank you. Like, thanks. So encourage people to even like get the audiobook. It's not just Audible and Amazon. There's Libro FM. There are all these places. I heard a woo back there.
I was like, I've never heard of Libro FM. What is this?
Libro FM is like the indie version. It's like going to like a small bookstore versus like the big store. So there's so many ways that you can share this book with people. And so I thank you all, like the people who've gotten this book and who are supporting me, but also tell your cousins, tell your mama. Like, I would love for everybody to be in conversation about this story world.
So we do have them available. Please support our Central Arkansas Library System, and please support Toya and grab this book today, and she'll be sure to sign it for you. I'm going to get mine signed first. Thank you all so much for coming out today.
Thank you.